Good evening. You're watching or listening to Redwood Wonk. My name is Eric Kirk. I'm with Dave Frank. We are going to discuss national political news of the day. The first topic is actually the first two topics are going to be election related. Actually, everything's election related at this point. But the first topic is: did the Democrats peak too soon? There is clear movement in the polling. That away from the Democrats and towards the Republicans. The Democrats were looking really good in August. The Dobbs issue seemed to galvanize a lot of voters. The Democrats have overperformed in the polls in every special election up until September, and there haven't been any since then. So we'll discuss that aspect of it, but definitely there's movement. Whether or not the polls are as bad as we think they are, pertaining to what we've discussed on this show as the Dobbs effect, which is my theory that the polls in November are going to be as skewed as they've been in the special elections. If they are skewed towards the Republicans right now. However, 538 doesn't seem to be buying that. They had no discussion of the special election polling inaccuracies in the Republicans' favor at all in their discussion today about whether or not the Republicans have momentum. They are absolutely convinced that, as usual, the polls are going to be skewed towards the Democrats. They really weren't in 2018. The other thing 538 and other analysts seem to forget is that the Trump factor didn't apply in any of the elections in which Trump wasn't literally on the ballot. The Trump factor did skew polls towards the Democrats in 2016 and 2020. I don't think it's really happened much outside of that. But again, we're talking about clear momentum. I think it's really kind of taken off since last week's inflation report. The jobs report was good. It had, 200,000, but we'll get into it in another show. But it's real clear that the Fed, their policies, they've been raising rates, interest rates since March, is having zero effect. And even though the Federal Reserve is not under control of the president or Congress, it works against the party in power. You got to make things happen. And inflation has not been tamed at all, really. The price of gas was dropped in August, started to go back up again in September. They're dropping again right now, probably due to fears of recession, because that's really the only impact that the Federal Reserve increases seem to be having. But also because Biden has pledged to and is continuing to increase the amount of oil coming out of the reserves in order to lower the prices of gas. So we'll see where that goes, but it hasn't affected the price of food. Food continues to climb, housing continues to climb, and even though wages have increased, that may even be a factor in it. The Federal Reserve, their sole obsession is we got to have less people employed and people being paid less, and then we get, then we take care of that. Takes care of inflation. Not doing it so far. Inflation this time around has a lot more to do with the supply chain than anything else, and they have not fixed that, and we have an ongoing war that's affecting food prices because Ukraine is a very important food source. A lot there to talk about, Dave, but I'm going to let you chime in here. Did the Democrats peak too soon?
I think, unfortunately, for Democrats, the answer to that is yes, in part because of their strategy. So let me explain a little bit what that means from my perspective. From what we've seen, massive amounts of money, over $100 million have been distributed from national political action committees towards special, identified targeted races with a near sole focus on the abortion issue. And this is because their strategy is basically that when you saw that the Kansas election, the special election to remove the right to an abortion from their state constitution, that appeared to be a solid strategy. It brought people that hadn't voted before off the sidelines. It even got crossover from Republican women. And this really did put the House majority in play for Democrats, despite the long-term trend in midterm elections, where typically there might be a 30 to 50 point swing or more. So they saw this as an avenue that may work, which was supported by evidence that women have been registering to vote, young women in particular, in record numbers. And so given the little bit of evidence that this strategy may be effective, Democrats invested heavily in single issue advocacy campaigns. And you could say that this may make sense if you are targeting states where abortion rights are in jeopardy. But from what the data shows now, particularly in House races, but also to a lesser extent, some of the swing back towards Republicans in GOP towards GOP in Senate races, it appears this may not be enough or will not be enough to expand support beyond the base due to the importance of the economy to most voters. And so we can get a little bit more into that. But as we know from the New York Times Marist poll that came out last week, the vast majority of people rate economy and inflation as their most important issue, and then other issues are marginal in comparison.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean it is having that kind of an impact. Now, some people are going to say, God, that's crazy because inflation is cyclical. It's going to go down at some point. We all know that. A lot of it has to do with forces that the government doesn't have in control. So, are enough voters sophisticated enough to understand that that's the case? But voting is very often a visceral thing. You want to send a message, and it may be also that messages are being sent through the polls. Sometimes voters do that. Sometimes people do that, and they have in the past. A lot of times they answer questions in a way they think is going to benefit their politics or the candidates that they support, and others sometimes want to send a message to those in power saying, that you need to deal with this and you need to address this. Now, as we just discussed last week, and we had a debate, should they continue making abortion the primary aspect of their message, the closing argument, or should they bring up the economy? Bernie Sanders warned the Democrats about this. Granted, everything was already happening, and the Democrats need to not only talk about the economy, but talk about what they've done, the steps that they've taken that are going to have an impact in the long run, the steps that they've tried to take, but there is Republican obstruction, but they got to tout what they've done, and also focus on the positive aspect of the economy, which is jobs are still being created and people are still able to and being paid well, not in terms of real dollars, but in terms of their actual dollars. They need to change that messaging. That's sort of very clear, or not even change it. They just need to re-emphasize that and go on the attack as they're doing it. Another reason is for I think the change is that we expected it to get closer because September is always the point where Republicans historically just throw attack ads, shamelessly inaccurate sometimes, but just really they're hitting Barnes on crime because he was dumb enough to get caught up in the whole defund the police thing, and they're using that against him. That just absolutely has been one of the most self-destructive slogans in political history, and yet there are some people who still insist on using it. And they're hitting, other people in the economy. They're hitting Fetterman on his health. We'll talk about that a little bit in the next session. And Walker is somehow convinced a lot of people that he's actually competent based on his performance in a debate we'll talk about. But Walker's hitting Warnock with attack ads, and Warnock has been slow to respond because he wants to keep the higher ground, as Democrats so often want to do. They don't want to go negative. Well, it's time to go negative. Now, granted, Walker's been hit with all kinds of things, so I don't know that it's really going to make that big of a difference for Warnock. He just needs to come across as a little tougher, I think. But definitely, there is movement. Now, again, 538 had a discussion this morning about whether or not, about the polls and whether or not they've moved and whether or not the polling is actually favoring the Republicans. And again, no mention of what has been referred to as the Dobbs effect, or the fact that every single special election up until, every single one since Dobbs, the polls were skewed in favor of the Democrats. The 538 has their fundamentals, as they call them, and they stick by them. And sometimes it costs them, and we'll see. But definitely, even if the polls are skewed towards the Republicans, one thing the polls really are good at picking up, no matter how accurate they are, is movement. And the movement has been away from Democrats and for Republicans, clearly.
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head there, and I think that's worth kind of unpacking in the time that we have left on this segment. That what we're talking about is, it's not 100% descriptive, but in general, the strategy of Democrats has been to focus very heavily on abortion and the Dobbs decision, and the strategy of Republicans has been nationally to make sure that they're pushing the issue of the economy, which is what people want to hear about, and crime. And in effect, inflation is part of the economy, and defund the police is part of crime. And so they're just able to, and then culture wars, things like transgender and critical race theory and things like that are real hot button issues. So in effect, both sides really are just trying to drum up their base. They're not looking to get the people that are that aren't likely to vote. They're not looking for moderates. They're not looking for people on the other side to win them over. But the momentum thing that I think really stands out immensely is that New York Times Marist poll, where there's a 30-point swing among suburban women voters that were plus 12% or so for Democrat, and then now plus 18 or so for Republican. There may be a methodological tweak in there that's likely voters like you talked about.
And again, that's a group of voters that also likes to send messages in their polling, and they may be doing that, but we don't know.
Right. And so what the criticism of did they peak too soon and why, I would argue the why is that it's not a comprehensive strategy for really engaging the public with the embracing the order, the magnitude of the importance of the moment here, that they are they have the potential to lose control of both houses of the legislature, particularly the House. The Senate is a little bit closer, and I think the Senate's okay, to be honest. But when it comes to the economy, just as a practical matter, to allow the Republicans to continue to cudgel the Biden administration and blame them for the high costs of things, when in reality economists say that about a third or so of, maybe a little bit less, but up to a third of the inflationary pressure to get us to 8.6 CPI or 6.2 core, which has been sort of stubborn for a while despite the Fed's actions, that a big chunk of this is actually comes down to the stimulus that came in the response to COVID. And so that's an immense amount of it. More than half, or approximately half, depending on the economist who's doing the study, of the cost of inflation comes from people who decide prices. Price setters are corporations deciding to raise prices. And there are record profits across multiple sectors: food, energy, pharmaceutical products. Like huge portions of Wall Street are making record money because when they are given the opportunity to raise prices, they do. So maybe that's a little bit complicated, and they say if you have to explain yourself, then maybe you ought not. So because it's too complicated for voters. But then you talk about your accomplishments. So for example, the Inflation Reduction Act included drug price caps and negotiations for Medicare. That's a cost on people. The cost of living increase they just announced for Social Security at 8 point whatever 6% or whatever it was. That's the highest in 40 years. The infrastructure bill, massive investments in the future.
And they're not talking about it.
The CHIPS bill, exactly. The CHIPS bill, massive investments in the future. These are alleviating supply chain pressures and creating jobs for the future. And the Democrats tried to put a child tax credit in the bill, but it was blocked by, of course, Republicans, but also, Manchin and Sinema. So that effectively brought, the record of it cut child poverty in half in the United States when we had it here. So maybe you're not going to have the exact same, program that we had during the COVID response, but these are all things that were done, and there's evidence that they ought to be hyping up the things that they've already done. But instead, what have the Democrats done? They've said Ohio is too competitive. Florida is too competitive. They're not investing in these senatorial candidates there. And those people are, Ryan and the Florida candidate also, who's a Democrat. Demings. They're both talking and walk. They're talking the talk and walking the walk, supporting working class, supporting investments in climate change, thoughtful responses to crime, thoughtful investments in the economy. It's really kind of sad that, and not to filibuster here, but I just think it's sad that, did the Democrats peak too soon? Yes, clearly. Unfortunately, I think that's true. But is it self-inflicted? Yes, I think it is.
The Democrats do have an opening here. The Republicans have uncharacteristically given them an opening, and that some of them are openly saying that they're going to basically crash the economy, keep the government from being funded if the Democrats don't agree to cut Social Security and Medicare. The Democrats really need to hammer on that point and attack them for it, because for whatever reason, a month before the election, Republicans decided to do this. It's really brazen on their part. Usually they stay quiet about it until after an election. I don't know if it leaked and they just figured they had to run with it. But the Democrats need to hammer on those, because Social Security is the third rail of politics, especially in places like Florida. So it's just and I don't know if they're doing that or not. We don't, I don't get to watch ads all around the country, but that is an opportunity they've taken. And say, well, what about abortion and the economy? Well, do it all. I mean, this is an election about a lot of things. So it just, it is, they need to really go on the attack on these issues. And anyway, there's a lot we could talk about here, but we do have to move on to the next topic.
I stayed silent as the atrocities committed against my mom were downplayed. I stayed silent when it came out that my father, Herschel Walker, had all these random kids across the country, none of whom he raised. And my favorite issue to talk about is father absence. Surprise, because it affected me. The abortion card drops yesterday. It's literally his handwriting in the card. They say they have receipts, whatever. He gets on Twitter. He lies about it. Okay, I'm done. Done. Everything has been a lie.
Next topic and related, debate-orama. We are in the season of debates. A lot of races have had their final debates. A couple of races have not even had them yet, had their first one yet. Just depends on how it works around the country. But the debates have been very contentious. I kind of accused the Democrats in the last segment of being wimpy. Well, they have not been wimpy in these debates. Starting with Tim Ryan, basically calling Trump a kiss ass right on the line, saying, pardon me, not Trump, Vance, J.D. Vance, and Vance reacted negatively to it and played right into Ryan's hands. Ryan said, "I seem to have touched a nerve," and he says, "You're right, you did." Well, you don't let yourself admit that you just got lost your cool because of what the other guy said. That people even in Ohio, people want a senator that has good temperament. But we don't know if that's going to affect the polls or where they are. Ohio is really tough to poll. They're classically inaccurate, so it's hard to say. And I believe the latest poll today had Vance ahead by 4 points against Ryan, but it was a poll that before had a bigger lead for Vance. So I don't know what to make of that. But other polls have been going Vance's way, however, which, It's hard to say, but that was a real contentious race. Herschel Walker and Warnock. I mean, Herschel Walker kept interrupting Warnock, and Warnock was not like pushing back in the first debate. Since the debate, he's been going on the attack more, but he's got to show that he's kind of tough. Herschel Walker pulled out the badge and got scolded for it. But Republicans seem to be re-energized, thinking that maybe he can win this. There was a second debate scheduled, but Herschel Walker decided not to show up. I think he's decided that he got what he could out of the debate. The first debate, Warnock went on the attack in that debate, in that showing, and so we'll see as to whether or not that race actually has been greatly affected by anything. But the debates all over the country, the Senate debates, congressional debates, even it got contentious between Kelly and Masters in Arizona. But before I hand it over to you, Dave, I want to point out that we have not yet seen the Sol-Fetterman Oz debate. Now, I think that Oz and the Republicans have made a big mistake here, really playing up. Oh, he's sick and he can't handle the job because I think what they did was they lowered the expectations with Fetterman. If Fetterman can simply show that he's cognitively fine, even if he misses a word here and there, he wins. But he's got to do that. He's got to convince it. Unfortunately, a lot of people don't understand the medicine of it. He came out with a report today that his doctor said that he's fine to serve. It's just there's a little bit of a processing issue that may or may not completely go away at a certain point. But the processing, and there's a little bit of pushback on the reporter who did the interview with him, who also didn't understand the medicine of it. So that's going to be probably the most crucial debate in the season. A lot of other debates to talk about, Dave, but I'm going to let you jump in here.
Yeah, sure. So again, I like to just start from big picture. And 538 is as good a source as any. It's one of the top for sure, depending on how you look at things. But one of the things that they mentioned, we also look at Real Clear Politics for other folks who are interested in doing their own research. Both of them kind of aggregate the polls that are out there, and both make 538 makes predictions that are nuanced. And so that's the reason we point to them, especially this time of year when things are moving so much. So as of now, they show a 75% chance that Republicans are going to take the House, and so that would be a 20. They're estimating about a 20-point swing away from their current advantage, possibly more. And in the Senate, I believe they're showing a 75% chance. Sorry, that's that one. My mistake. So in the Senate, they're showing a 61% chance that Democrats take the Senate.
A drop of about 9 points since it was at its peak of 70, although they caution that change isn't as significant as it looks, but still.
Yeah, with the probabilities, I think they run like 40,000 probabilities, and they end up with saying that the Democrats will probably pick up one seat. So that's not great from where like you said, where things were most recently. And so when it comes to what's on the line here, the Democrats currently have control of both. And you would think that in these debates, that's where people are going to really make their stand, because this is the time of year people are paying attention. And as you said, you'd be right. People really are slinging it, and compounding the talking to the base. The element of this is that lots of money are getting spent on trying to convince the base to get agitated and show up. And so there's over 95 million spent in Pennsylvania, over 76 million in Wisconsin, over 140 million in Georgia. Those are 3 of the 4 states that are considered those like bellwether states that you'll have to win 3 out of 4 of those 3 plus Nevada in order for the Republicans to take the Senate, for example. So these candidates are out there, really letting it fly. I will agree with you what you said about Pennsylvania, which is the sort of the shade that's being thrown on Fetterman about his stroke recovery. He has an audiological problem, and he's needing closed captions to read. That does not appear to be a cognitive problem, like I said last week, but you wouldn't know it from watching the news or watching Oz's campaign. So they really are just trying to say, sorry, he doesn't have the capacity. But like you said, we'll see in that debate, which hasn't happened yet. But whether it's the Ohio debate or the Georgia debate or the Wisconsin debates, it really is a lot of mudslinging and name calling and not giving the candidates their best moments. Like, there is a lot of negativity that's coming out of it. So let's start with real quick, Georgia. Walker has all this bad news about, he's a pro-life person who has had at least one abortion and multiple children with multiple women. There's this values gap that Warnock is not actually exploiting as much as he could. Instead, he's just saying, look, I want government to stay out of the abortion debate entirely, taking the high ground. So that, to me, that bodes well for him, because you don't want to, you get out of the way when people are sinking. And so he's an exception to the heavy language. But Wisconsin was one, I think you alluded to it in the prior segment, where Ron Johnson is really focusing on crime and defund the police. And, he's proposed a statewide referendum on abortion to let voters decide. So he's sidestepping that issue entirely. He doesn't want to get caught in he feels that his party position may hurt him.
The debate, we haven't seen any polls since the debate, and I'm really going to be curious as to whether or not Ron Johnson was hurt in that debate. He had some gaffes, and on top of it, the audience supporting Barnes would boo and laugh at him, literally. And when he said certain things, and he closed out, and this was a big one. They were asked, say something positive about your opponent. And what came from Barnes is, well, he's a family man. I appreciate, all of his family. And what came basically from Johnson is, well, he hates America. I mean, he had a good dad and a good chance to be raised right, and he hates America. He got booed for that. And, that does have a negative impact. That was probably one of the more interesting debates, but will that change? Will that move the needle? I don't know. But he definitely, that was a debate that Ron Johnson probably should have thought it through ahead of time. When you're asked to say something positive about your opponent, you say something positive.
So one interesting thing we just did have, was another element of what's in the public discourse. We did just have the last January 6th committee meeting presentation to the hearing rather, and Johnson is really caught up in the lawsuits and caught up in the drama of the strategy of Trump administration to overturn the election. He's got a front row seat to a whole bunch of issues. You would think that Mandela Barnes would have highlighted some of that stuff, or at least his campaign spending money would highlight that and really try to make it crystal clear.
That's his weak point.
Yeah, it's he's got a potential criminal liability here, in fact. But no, there's been nothing there, and I don't know exactly why, but we haven't really heard much. Even though we're hearing a ton about Democrats are for democracy and the right to vote, and we have a choice between authoritarianism and democracy. You're not seeing this at the Senate level.
And really, Barnes should be making a big deal about it, because that's probably one of the key reasons that it's close.
Right.
That's, what was that Ron Johnson thought he was in Oklahoma, not a purple state, and just went totally overboard in favor of Trumpism, whereas, other senators in those states were kind of cautious about it. He threw caution to the wind and went with it. Well, he's Barnes needs to find a way to exploit that. You can't avoid it. We'll see if they do. I'm sure that they're all evaluating. Barnes has won statewide elections there, but that was a pretty contentious debate as well. We're watching those. Some of the others aren't really as crucial, and it'll be curious, to see. But we should talk a little bit about Demings. She went hard after Rubio the other night. Too soon to see if that if resulted in any movements in the polls. It may but she was on the attack. I mean, I didn't get to watch the whole thing. I saw the clips though, and she went after him, and Rubio, his responses were kind of weak. So, again, will that move the needle? We just don't know.
Yeah, my observations about the Florida debate were basically that Rubio is sticking to his platitudes and the sort of this. So we're hearing the same from him that we've heard throughout his career. In effect, he sort of tries to take the high ground, but while throwing some zingers out there about in this case, the Biden administration's policies and he can't talk about crime with her because she's the former chief of police for Orlando. So there's and she's solid in her responses and her vision and her understanding of crime. So that was an area where you didn't see him really gaining any kind of ground. And like you said, she did stand up to him, and she was combative and aggressive in a way that indicates that she can go toe to toe with him. Who the one area I saw her say something that he really did make a good point was that she was trying to say that he's play acting as a foreign policy expert. I think maybe one of her experts might have said that, and she just repeated it. That's my guess. One of her advisors, but he was really able to parry pretty much by saying, "I don't know what you're talking about. I'm the ranking member from my party on the Foreign Relations Committee, and I'm the former chair of the committee. This is my job." So that I got to give credit where credit's due. He did a pretty good job of parrying some of the attacks. That was the one that stood out the most to me.
Yeah, but foreign policy people don't generally vote on,
exactly.
As a big deal. It's, I really think Deming should be pulling out that exchange that Rubio had with Chris Christie during the presidential run in 2016, because if he's acting, repeating himself, and he was basically accused of being a robot where he just couldn't adjust. He kept repeating the same stuff over and over again. But I don't know what they're doing in Florida. I'm sure Demings has made use of everything as possible, but it would seem like you bring that out again, especially if he's kind of repeating that tendency to not adapt. So, there have been a lot of other debates. Mark Kelly was attacked on immigration, but Mark Kelly is emphasizing, just like Ryan emphasized in Ohio, I'm independent. I take on the Democrats, my fellow Democrats, almost as much as I take on Republicans. Mark Kelly is saying basically the same thing. But Kelly seemed to handle it pretty well. I actually don't think Kelly's in any danger. I have yet to see a poll where Masters was ahead, and only about 2 or 3 polls in the past couple of months, even recently, where he's within the margin of error. But the media loves a horse race, and they still have it in play.
There's one other interesting one that I think is worth mentioning. I'll be brief. The Utah debate, the Utah Senate race.
Oh, yes.
Independent Evan McMullin, he's going against Republican Mike Lee, and he says if he wins, then he won't actually caucus with either party, which doesn't seem reasonable to me. You kind of have, if you want to get I've heard it said, and I think it's 100% true, that if you want to get on any committee, you need to caucus with one of the two parties who do the committee assignments. So there's that piece of it. But that said, I thought what was really interesting is that he gave a zinger to Mike Lee. First of all, Mike Lee is begging Mitt Romney to endorse him, and he won't.
He won't.
Because Mike Lee is another one of those people who is, suspectly close to Trump and Trump's orbit. But he's also out there, one of those people saying we need to cut Social Security and Medicare. And so Evan McMullin really pointed that out. That said, what are you talking about? Like, people do not support this. This is not a good idea. So Mike Lee, that's a big mistake to make, to come out when you're fighting for your seat. But we'll see. I think that'll be an interesting one. Utah is very conservative, but there's a really good chance that Evan McMullin got enough exposure when he ran for president. Mike Lee even voted for him. So Evan brought that up in the debate too. You voted for me for president. You must believe I'm a good candidate.
All right. There are a few debates to come, and we'll be discussing them in the weeks before the election.
very clear to all of you, and I've been very clear to the president. He bears responsibilities for his words and actions. No ifs, ands, or buts. I asked him personally today, does he hold responsibility for what happened? Does he feel bad about what happened? He told me he does have some responsibility for what happened. And he needs to acknowledge that.
I know this is not fun. I know this is not great. I know this is very tough, but what I want to do, especially through here, is I don't want to rush things. I want everybody to have all the information needed. I've had it with this guy. What he did is unacceptable. Nobody can defend that, and nobody should defend it.
Okay, for our last segment, we always come back to this guy, Trump. He's been in the news a lot lately. Today, the court ruled against him that the congressional panel, January 6th committee, is going to get even more of John Eastman's letters. John Eastman, of course, was the architect of the whole very weak strategy for Trump to stay in power. And the judge said, part of the reason is that Trump fraudulently or possibly perjured himself with a declaration he submitted in one of those 65 lawsuits back in 2021. That challenging the election, and this judge basically says he's a liar, and these are necessary. So it looks like the January 6th committee is going to get a new group of emails. But he's been in the news a lot. The Republicans are really concerned. We've discussed him as sort of the wild card who might spoil things for the Republicans if he's too much into it. And he slammed what is his name, Dia in Colorado.
O'Day?
O'Day, that's it. O'Day, who has maybe a marginal chance of defeating Bennett, but probably lost it when Trump attacked him, because he was critical of Trump and trying to distance himself from Trump, and Trump doesn't like that, and so he probably just sank any chance of replacing Bennett, flipping against Bennett. I think it was going to be weak anyway. Bennett was not is not a bad candidate. He's popular as an incumbent, but O'Day is not a Trumpy Republican and possibly had a chance of drawing over some of the centrist vote. And but even if he does, a lot of Trump voters are probably just not going to turn out for him, or they'll vote third party or something. So Trump is in the news that way. He's in the news in a bunch of other ways, but I'm going to let you charge in, and I'm going to dig a couple things up here.
Yeah, sure. So, we talked about this being Trump-orama week just because there's been so many different avenues where he's made himself front and center at a time that's critical to Republicans, and he thinks he's helping, and in a lot of ways he's not. So one of those ways is the January 6th committee had that final hearing I alluded to in the last segment. And so for folks who don't know, because not everybody watches, that the purpose of that last hearing was, from the perspective of the committee, was to lay out Trump's state of mind. And they provided evidence from Republican staffers that Trump acknowledged that he lost the election, but was adamant that no one admitted in public, and that they would do everything in their power to make it so that they could push through the narrative that did not happen. And he said things like, "I can't believe I lost to that guy," and so they've got firsthand witness testimony of that. So that was one of the cases they tried to make. The other case that they made was that there's an ongoing threat to the country that Trump poses, in part because there were messages between the Secret Service and the White House and Oath Keeper leadership, that everybody was aware that there was a violent plot directed at Vice President Pence, and people kept trying to get President Trump to do something about it, and he refused. So I don't know why this isn't more front and center in people's minds, but the committee did lay out the evidence from messages and from testimony about the threat that he and people who support him, not everybody who voted for him, not everybody who's a Republican, but an inner clique of folks who were not working with the facts in a fair way. The committee tried to present those facts from the perspective of Trump staffers and people that they were in connection with, both inside and outside of government. So that really means he's got, if anybody is paying attention, that this is something that should ring alarm bells or possibly motivate people to participate in the election. So far, no traction, limited coverage, unless you watch highly partisan media, which would skew it in either direction. Those are, sort of preaching to the choir. One other thing that I would think is worth mentioning that you pointed out is Trump's anti-Semitic Truth Social messages. If there's one sure way to really piss off your supporters and your donors and the networks of institutions that support the government and governance in general, policy implementation, is to go out and say something horrifically antisocial. And so it's ironic that he's got this Truth Social is the name of his platform that he owns. He said, quote, U.S. Jews need to get their act together before it's too late. I hate to say that out loud even, but that's so Trump was making the claim that he's done the most for Jews than any president. Israeli Jews understand this, and he could be elected prime minister of Israel if he ran for it. But U.S. Jews just don't appreciate him. That was his point he was trying to make. And I think what he was talking about is moving the capital of Israel from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. That just shows how he views the world, that this is a part of a transactional system. And he did this, he made this choice as a transactional response, in part to Sheldon Adelson's donating $20 million to him to put it up on front and center. And Trump wants to remind people, look what I've done. He wanted to claim credit for that. He thinks that somehow that will continue to add value to his endorsement for Senate and House candidates, that they ought to be getting more support from American Jewish community. But in reality, it's ridiculous to group an entire group of people into a single mode of thinking. So just on the merits, it's factually ridiculous. It's also it's a double standard, because conservatives shouldn't be in this position. They should be critical of people who are making ethnic and religious prejudices. Right. Comments like this publicly, but you're hearing crickets on that too. So they
certainly attacked Tlaib over very even less serious stuff of the same vein of making these generalizations and the rest. So it's not there is hypocrisy there, and I noticed that a lot of Republicans have just stayed silent.
Exactly. That was the point I was making. You just underscored, that's really where I was going with this, is that, people say that the social psychology, the bonds are solid, and anytime the alpha of the group is criticized, you take it as a personal criticism of yourself. But I would say that in this case, when you see your own alpha doing something you are critical of, the rational response is to be quiet. So it makes sense that they're being quiet. It's just that this you compound this with some of the other things that Trump said, like you said, Senator O'Day in Colorado, is the candidate running for Senate, the Republican. Trump lashed out at him and said, quote, MAGA doesn't vote for stupid people with big mouths. Good luck, Joe. So he's kneecapping this guy's
That's
candidacy.
it. I mean, I don't think that he can win. O'Day can win at this point after that statement. There's just no way. I don't want to run out of time before we bring up the fact that the January 6th committee is going to subpoena him if they haven't already.
We buried the lead, right? Sorry.
Yes. Do we think that he will show up? Nah, no. So why did they do this?
I think it's team building. I think it's the solidarity of messaging and saying that, we've presented all this evidence. We want to let everybody know that even though Trump's not going to respond to us and our position we have in this process, that we really want the, Attorney General and the Justice Department to pick up where we left off, because if he's not willing to if he really believes the election was stolen, he would defend himself. Because he's not defending himself, then we ought to hold him to account for the fact that we believe it to be the case he knows he didn't win. We believe it to be the case that he committed he was at the hub of a hub and spoke conspiracy that we typically use for organized crime in this country, and that the Justice Department ought to pick up the mantle. I think that was the crux, because this could be for people that don't know, that could have been their last meeting, because if the Democrats lose control of the House, there will be no more January 6th committee, and it might be the last we've heard about it. So this was their parting salvo.
It basically setting it up to call him a chicken when he doesn't show up. That's pretty much it. To say obviously he has something to hide, because he's afraid, and that was it. I think they know that it wasn't going to come, that he's not going to show up, and that there's no way that they're going to get the courts to force him to show up, and the rest. There may be one more hearing. Because based on these Eastman letters, possibly there is the rumors. So they got till January to do that. But it's and that might be their parting shot. I mean that's going to be good. But they also might just do up and write. They got to get a report done before January. Even if they manage to hold the House, I think they really need to wrap this up. They got to do it. For one thing, they're not going to have Cheney anymore. So it's just that she really was key to their messaging on that. But anyway, Trump continues to amaze. I mean, he just again, it's about him. The DOJ has asked the appellate court to shut down the whole special master thing of the lower court at this point, and but things weren't going his way anyway. Special master, as we talked about on another show, isn't particularly impressed with Trump. So, and most of the appellate court decisions are going his way. The Supreme Court refused to hear it. They don't want anything to do with him. And so he's kind of on his own. However, what's his name? The guy who used to be on Fox News, but the Lufa
Chris
guy.
Wallace.
No, the Lufa guy, the big tall guy that was really controversial. I'm forgetting his name. This is bad, but maybe I just don't want to. There was a website, Sweet Jesus I Hate, and I forget his name.
Britt Hume.
What?
Hume?
No, the real obnoxious guy who got into it with Al Franken. Anyway, he's saying, I'm not going to take anything about Mar-a-Lago seriously if they don't file charges. So he's put that out. I wish I could remember his name. This is bad. But he's been out of it for a long time. But he was like the number one outside of Hannity Fox News guy for a long time. And he was kind of somewhat independent, but and he and Al Franken hated each other. There was that famous debate they were at where a couple of people were caught in the middle of it, and anyway, but I will have to. Boy, that's embarrassing. I'll have to come back a long time, or maybe my mind has just shut his name out. But anyway.
I'm curious with you. I mean, we just have a few minutes left in this segment. So you've mentioned the Mar-a-Lago document potential lawsuits. There's also the potential lawsuits in the state of New York that have to do with the way that the Trump organization managed its finances, with basically the equivalent of two sets of books, or flexible books. I think really what the charge is that the books were, the valuations of assets were changing, not based on reality, but based on the amount of money they were looking to borrow. I think that's the claim that Letitia James is going for there. In effect, that's fraud. And then so between that and also the election machines and the false electors, so those are federal charges that might never materialize based on obstructing a government process or election interference. So all those sets of crimes potentially. Do you have any sense that any of those charges might actually come about? Or do you think that Trump will just be able to waltz his way towards the next presidential election cycle?
I think first of all, Bill O'Reilly is the name.
Oh, my goodness. How do we forget him?
And secondly, it just came to me. And secondly, I think that they're not charges, remember. This is a civil suit. They're causes of action. And I think even if they win on it, first of all, it's unlikely.
Which one are you talking about?
The Letitia James
New York State,
lawsuit. Yeah, the New York one. The one that I think is more dangerous for him criminally is the one in Georgia, of course. And they
This
seem
is
to
one
be,
I didn't even name, by the way. Sorry.
yeah, yeah. That so is he going to be in jail? No, I don't think so. People like Trump don't end up going to jail unless they really mess up. And he's been kind of with the civil suit in New York. It's going to be the death penalty for his foundation that he always took money from, and he won't be able to do business in New York, but he's not doing that much business there anyway. So will that affect him in terms of the election? No. The Georgia one might.
What about Florida documents in Mar-a-Lago?
It's hard to say where that one's going to go because I don't know what I would say definitely if we had an aggressive attorney general, it would be. But if they just are content to have gotten their documents, then Bill O'Reilly is right. It's not going to go, it's not going to have any meaning beyond what's there. They got their documents and then, they take forever to investigate and don't do anything. It's it could get to be like Durham. Durham, he just had a big verdict against him this week. He's probably dead. He's had 2 more years than Mueller had to find whatever dirt, and he's come up with nothing, and can't seem to even get. This is the second acquittal that's happened in his case. I think it risks being like that. You wait too long, nobody cares.
So besides like Mueller and Durham, those were Democrat charges against Democratic sort of.
No, Durham was Trump charging Democrats. He's the one who's been in charge of investigating the FBI's bias against Trump.
Yeah.
So yeah. So that was and that was supposed to uncover the vast conspiracy, and he hasn't.
So you're saying that you believe it to be the case that any conspiracy, federal charges coming from Attorney General related to the election cover up or the false electors and looking at machines out of inappropriately accessing machines and that whole conspiracy, you think that just doesn't go anywhere.
You can't wait this long to make the charges. If you wait this long, everybody thinks that you don't really have a case. I mean, they're just waiting too long. And I think Merrick Garland is just really passive on this stuff, doesn't want to be in the controversy, wishes he wasn't even in the news. Well, he shouldn't have taken the job then. Yeah. I mean, that's just the way it is. But
well, thank you for going out on the limb. I appreciate it because I put you on the spot a little bit because Trump-orama, what comes from Trump-orama? We're going to get more Trump, I guess.
Unless something develops in Georgia, because that's different. But we'll talk about that another time. All right, this brings us to predictions. Dave, what do you have for us?
Well, the last few weeks I've been looking at individual Senate races. So there was one intermittent prediction I made, but over the last month, I think I've made 3 or 4. And, when you add it all up, we're 3 weeks out. My prediction based on, the most recent polling data, trends and modeling and polls and everything, I do think the Democrats will hold on to the Senate by 1 seat. And it's a coincidence that it's the same as 538 exactly, but it's in part because of those 4 states. They say Georgia, Nevada, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, the tipping point states. They say if the Democrats get 2, they will keep control. And I do believe they will get Georgia and Pennsylvania, which is enough. The Republicans need 3, and I don't think they're going to be able to get Nevada, Wisconsin, and one of those other 2.
Okay, well, I'm going to take a chance here, and I absolutely hope I'm wrong, and I will be overjoyed if I'm wrong, but I just don't think Cortez Masto is putting up a really good fight. Laxalt is another one of those Republicans that isn't too Trumpy. I was ready to be certain about this until about a week ago when 14 members of the Laxalt family endorsed Cortez Masto. So we'll see. And I'm a little bit anxious about it now because actually that polling hasn't really moved very much. It's been really close. But I don't see, if you talk about the fundamentals, I don't see her how she's going to defeat. She's just not an impressive senator. She's not even popular with Latinos, even though she's the first Latino senator for that state, and the rest. But I am going to quickly close out by saying that I am even more convinced, despite the trends, that Warnock will win in Georgia. I do not think that Walker is going to be able to win that, period. But anyway, that brings us to the end of the show. We're going to have a lot to talk about over the next couple of weeks. But until then, stay informed and stay engaged.